Hey, thanks for tuning in. On today's Locked On Big Ten, Tre Demps of the Big Ten Network is in with us to talk about everything going on in Big Ten basketball. We'll rack the former Northwestern player's brain on all the things that he's seen in the early parts of the season, and we'll also, of course, let you know everything you need to know about what's going on in the conference right here on Locked On Big Ten.
You are Locked On Big Ten, your daily podcast on the Big Ten Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Thanks for tuning in. I'm Nate Dickinson. You're listening into Locked On Big Ten. Everything you need to know about the conference every weekday, Monday through Friday. We've got a good show lined up for you today. Big Ten Network analyst Tre Demps is in. You can see him actually tomorrow in studio throughout all the Big Ten Network slate of games. And he's here with us on today's show on Locked On at Big Ten. Excited to have Trey in to pick his brain on everything Big Ten basketball. Had a great conversation about all the stuff he had to say about what he's seen in the first part of the season. We'll get to him in just a minute. First, a quick look at the scores from the last day in the Big Ten. A couple of Big Ten basketball scores to report from yesterday. Both Purdue and Northwestern won on Monday. They weren't playing anyone that was going to beat them by any means unless there was a big surprise. Purdue beat Incarnate Word by only 20 points. It was a 38-point spread if you wanted to put money on that game. 79-59 the final score there. Northwestern beat Illinois Springfield real bad. Final score 90-50 in that matchup. As far as today's slate of games, Michigan State's on the road facing off against Oakland. Southeast Louisiana is traveling to play Iowa, and then Michigan's at home hosting IPFW. That's Indiana, Purdue, Fort Wayne. That's a look at all the scores from really everything around college basketball yesterday in the Big Ten, at least over on the men's side. Meanwhile, looking over at the women's side, Florida Gulf Coast defeated Michigan State in overtime, a thriller of a game yesterday, 85-84 the final score there. Nia Clouden for Michigan State scored 50 points in the matchup, but Michigan State does fall just short. Kirsten Bell scores 28 to lead Florida Gulf Coast. It was an incredible performance to watch and just a great game, even though, again, MSU and the Spartans come up just a little bit short. That's, again, a look around the Big Ten scores here today. We do have Big Ten women's games also taking place throughout the day as well. Big ones to really mention, Northwestern plays, oh no, that was canceled actually, Northwestern and Oregon as we're talking. And then Ohio State plays San Diego State. Later on today, Michigan State hosting West Virginia as well. Those are really the only Power 5 matchups on the women's side for the day. A quick little first segment here because we want to get into everything that we have to talk about with Tre Demps. A lot of stuff going on in the Big Ten, a lot of questions for us to ask him. We'll get into things with him in just a minute. You're listening into Locked On Big Ten. This is it, the putt to win the tournament. If you sink it, championship's yours. But as you're going on that backswing, your visor falls over your eyes. Is this how you're running your business? With limited visibility because you're going through things with old spreadsheets or outdated software? Well, it doesn't have to be that way. Right now, you can switch over to NetSuite by Oracle. It's the #1 cloud financial system to power your business's growth. 93% of surveyed businesses increased their visibility and control after upgrading to NetSuite. Over 28,000 businesses already use NetSuite. So for the new year, NetSuite has a new financing program for those ready to upgrade if you want to join them with a link over at netsuite.com/LockedOnNCAA. Head to netsuite.com/LockedOnNCAA for this special one-of-a-kind financing offer on the #1 financial system for growing businesses. That's netsuite.com/LockedOnNCAA.
You're tuned into Locked On Big Ten, everything you need to know about the conference every weekday, Monday through Friday. I'm Nate Dickinson. We're joined over the Zoom call by Tre Demps, analyst over at Big Ten Network and former Northwestern 1,500-point scorer as well. Let's not forget that, Trey. It's great to have you on here on the program. As you've started to dive into this Big Ten basketball season, I have stuff I want to get to and kind of pick your brain about what we've seen on the hardwood, but First, I feel like it'd be foolish not to just ask you, a lot's gone on at this first couple of, I guess, months we're in now, couple of months, but what have you seen out of the Big Ten? What's impressed you? What's been surprising? Just overall, what's been your elevator pitch so far on what this conference has done?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Nate. It's a pleasure to be on the show. Diving right into the conference. I mean, I think we expected early on that Michigan would be a lot better. I think that's, the biggest, surprise so far. They had a really good game against Southern Utah, beat them by 37, but I think people, expected a little bit too much out of Caleb Houston. I think coming in, people expected him to be this do-it-all scorer, but really, in reality, he's a catch-and-shoot three-point shooter, and that's okay, but they just don't have a lot of playmaking on the perimeter. And then a guy like Devontae Jones, I think, was a disappointment as well. A guy who came from Coastal Carolina, averaged 18 points per game, shot 38% from three. He was expected to kind of be the floor general. But I think one of the things that Juwan Howard did, which was really smart, was, they told him at the beginning of the season that he was going to have to sacrifice, right? That he was going to have to be a distributor, get the ball into Hunter Dickinson and, Eli Brooks. But I think they kind of overrided that plan a little bit and let Devontae Jones play his game. He's averaging, 14 points per game over his last two, shooting 60% from the field. So they're letting him kind of play more freely, be more involved in ball screen actions and not be a distributor. So I think that is going to bode well once Big Ten play starts. But yeah, I think that Michigan team, being 7-4 right now is not what people expected. I think they're 10th in offensive efficiency in the conference, which is incredible. But I think that's the biggest surprise so far. I think one of the biggest storylines I wanted to talk about was just kind of the middle of the Big Ten. I think from 6 to 11, man, that it's going to be tough. And the teams that I'm looking at, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Iowa, Indiana, Maryland, it'll be interesting to see kind of how those teams shake out in that middle pack of the Big Ten.
That middle of the pack, you're right, is going to be tight. And as you mentioned, it could go from like 6 to 11. So not all those teams are going to make that NCAA tournament. All these games here matter. I guess I'll ask, is with that big group of teams, it's a little bit too much to dive all the way into how they all relate to one another. But which one do you think is the prime candidate or two to jump up and make that leap into that top tier? Because that's been kind of a discussion too. It seems like there's a very definitive top tier and then rest of the conference here before the bottom of the barrel.
The team I'm looking at is Minnesota. I mean, I think they've surprised everyone. They were picked last in the preseason. You get a new coach in Ben Johnson. You let go of Richard Pitino. So there's just a lot of uncertainty. You have a ton of transfers. But, I mean, the guys that they recruited to bring into Minnesota have been excellent. I mean, you look at Peyton Willis, Jamison Battle, E.J. Stevens. They're averaging 47 points per game between the three of them. So, just the way that they play, how exciting they are, they don't run a lot of sets. They just kind of, spread you out. It's almost like an NBA game, they spread you out. They get into a lot of ball screen actions, isolations. I mean, for me, they're the most exciting team to watch in the Big Ten, just because obviously in the Big Ten, right now you think of interior play, a lot of post feeds. I'm a guard. I'm a guy who, likes to see good guard play. And that's what this Minnesota team has. And I think it'll bode well in Big Ten play. And then if, they're able to make it into the tournament, I think it'll bode well there as well.
Yeah, Minnesota, a team that's kind of just island of misfit toys out there. It's been a lot of guys, D2 transfers, you said, JUCO transfers, just guys who were in Minnesota playing basketball that they were able to bring in from the backyard. Peyton Willis, you said, actually has Big Ten experience. He's the only player on that team with it. So Minnesota, again, surprising everyone, but honestly, as you mentioned with those preseason polls, they were picked to go last. It seems like anything they do is a surprise. But again, Gophers have been playing well.
We'll be back with Tre Demps in just a minute here to wrap up the show. Before we get to that, though, if you want to get in on the action on Big Ten basketball games or Big Ten football bowl games that are just around the corner, bowl season's already underway, then you should head over to Prize Picks. They've got more college football options for you with daily fantasy sports than anyone out there. We're talking about not just playing daily fantasy with the most known players, Power 5 guys that honestly for us Locked On Big Ten people, we know already that they're going to be there on the site. They've got mid-major guys though too. If you're in whatever area of the Big Ten that has those smaller schools, Western Michigan if you're a MAC fan, Northern Illinois, Ball State, people like that, we're talking those kind of schools getting in too on Prize Picks. So if you want to see what I'm talking about, head on over to prizepicks.com and you sign up, use our promo code Locked On for a match of 100% up to $100 on your first deposit. What you do is you pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections. You can win up to 10 times on any entry that you put in, and it's just you versus the projected numbers, not a big group of people like on your other daily fantasy sports sites. So head on over to prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app. Again, our promo code's Locked On when you sign up to get that bonus, and be sure to at least try out, again, a new way to play and a way to play with more of your college athletes for our Locked On Big Ten and other college fans than anywhere else.
Moving on to what you mentioned about how you're a guard, you like to see good guard play. I've made a connection in my head that I want to get kind of your thoughts on. We have these 2 struggling teams at the top, but Michigan, Illinois. Michigan was supposed to be really good. Illinois was a top 25 touted team in the preseason. Neither's really stepped up to that expectation. Both of them have that big experience coming back in the front court. You got Hunter Dickinson up there. You got Kofi Cockburn for Illinois. A lot of these players who need that growth and experience for both these teams, not in that front court, in the back court. They don't have the same kind of person there to lead them along the way. How much do you feel like that could be hurting teams and these younger players' development? I guess not even hurting, but how much would having somebody else there at the guard spot help as opposed to where these players have and teams have their experience?
Yeah, I mean, with Illinois, I mean, I'm thinking of how much they're missing Andre Curbelo right now. I mean, this Illinois team is leading the conference in turnovers. They're averaging, I believe, 15 turnovers per game, which if you do that, especially with road games in the Big Ten, you're not going to win a lot of road games and you're probably not going to win a lot of home games. So they miss Andre Curbelo. You know, it's kind of uncertain, you know, why he's out. You know, he had the concussion. But you know, I think once they get him back, one of the good things is how well Alfonso Plummer's been playing, you know, shooting over 40% from 3. I think he's the best 3-point shooter in the conference, to be honest with you. And then they've gotten Trent Frazier going. He had a really big game against Arizona. So I think that's going to be big because when Andre Curbelo comes back, he's not going to be expected to be this, you know, the all-American guard that, you know, a lot of people thought he was going to be. He's just going to have to be able to play his role, you know, get into the paint, find guys, you know, set the offense up. In one of the issues that I think this Illinois team is having is just the fact that they're not able to run their sets fluidly, right? They're not, when you watch their half court offense, you know, there's a lot of kind of disruptions and, you know, they're not able to, you know, get post feeds and wing entries, you know, just some of the simple fundamentals of basketball. So I think once Andre Curbelo gets back, you know, not too much will be expected of him. He'll just have to run the offense. And I think this Illinois team will be fine.
I'm just going to keep jumping around with you here, Trey. It's fun to at least get your takes on all this kind of stuff. Ohio State beat Duke, but really playing better at home than on the road. Obviously has the big win against Wisconsin too. What's your opinion on these Buckeyes who were thought of as pretty good in that middle of the pack, but they're another team that at least at some points it looks like they could be top tier in this conference too.
Yeah, I love this Ohio State team. You know, I think arguably they had the smartest team in the Big Ten, just in terms of guys knowing their roles. I think it's not talked about enough, just how much Jamari Wheeler has brought to this program, just his leadership, his defense, his toughness, and then the interior play. You know, I think if you talk about just from a whole, they have the best interior play in the conference. You know, obviously EJ Liddell gets a lot of recognition, and rightfully so, one of the best bigs in the conference. But when you look at Zed Key and Kyle Young averaging 21 points per game between the two of them, shooting 60% from the field, I mean, when you get that from your second and third best bigs on your team, I mean, it's tough for the opposing team when you got to go up against EJ Liddell. Okay, and then EJ Liddell comes out, then you bring in Kyle Young. So you got to guard all the bigs that Ohio State has are offensive threats, and that imposes a lot of pressure on, you know, defenses. So I really like this team. I think, one of the themes in the Big Ten is guard play. I think Michi Johnson and Justin Arns are going to have to play better, be a little bit more productive on the offensive end and be more consistent. But if those guys can be like around 9 to 10 point per game guys, this Ohio State team is going to be really scary.
Trey, I can't get you out of here without asking about COVID-19 and the effect that it started to have once again on this college basketball season. This is obviously something that I could ask a whole bunch of other people about how it's going to affect things on Selection Sunday and standings and stuff like that. But I've got someone who was actually on the court here, and I got to ask you about that too. With just dealing with this as a player, what's it mean, and how do you manage with unexpected cancellations, reschedulings that might have you packing in games that you honestly just don't know yet when you're going to be playing basketball? What kind of a toll does that take when at the college level, guys are used to getting into a routine?
Yeah, I mean, it stinks, to be honest with you. And, talking to some Big Ten players, the sense is like, it feels like you're getting back to what it was last year. And that's not what you want with, no fans and a lot of restrictions in terms of what you can do on your free time. That takes a toll on you mentally, right? And, not just as a basketball player, but just as a person, for these student athletes, these kids. So, I think I'm looking at the leadership of, the conference, right? Just how they're going to figure this out, what regulations they're going to put in place, how are they going to, make the best of this situation in terms of, making sure everyone is safe, but also making sure games get played and, guys are being able to, stay healthy and be able to, be productive on the court. And, it's a lot. I'm glad I'm not in that position. I'm glad I'm not a decision maker, because it's hard, a lot of politics coming into play when you talk about these things. And so, it's going to be tough, but, like I said, they're used to dealing with this from last year, but hopefully they come up with some solutions fast.
Yeah, you're right. It's a really tough decision to try and make. And as we getting involved in the media know, it's obviously never going to make everybody happy. Someone's going to be upset about it, no doubt about that. So it'll obviously be something that we hope isn't something we have to talk about again, but I got a feeling that it's going to have to rear its head a few more times before we're all said and done with all this. Tre Demps is a Big Ten Network analyst here on Locked On Big Ten here today, breaking down just everything from the start of the Big Ten basketball season. We'll, of course, try to get Trey back on sometime soon to get into some more specifics on stuff. Just wanted to get his takes in here today. And Trey, thanks again for coming on. It was great getting your insight in on everything going on around the Big Ten.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yep. Before we let you go, we remind everyone where you can get all of the stuff that you're up to again.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter, Tre Demps 14. You could catch me on the Big Ten Network a few times a week on the Today Show, and also pregame, halftime, and postgame show.
We're doing this on Tuesday. It'll go up right after. When can we see you next?
So I'll be on tomorrow. I'll be on Wednesday. I'll be doing pregame, halftime, and postgame of all the Big Ten games on the network. So.
All right, so there you go. If you want to tune in tomorrow, which is Wednesday, depending on what day you're listening in to Trey, you can, of course, hear more about what he has to say about the Big Ten there, and hopefully again right here on Locked On Big Ten too. And thanks again for coming on and joining us for a few minutes here, Trey.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me.
Thanks again for making Locked On Big Ten your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all of your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q, with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available on all platforms, wherever you're listening to this right now also.